Morning, everyone, and welcome to the regular meeting of the Architectural Review Board. Today is Thursday, May 7th. Could we please have a roll call?
Chair Pop,
Present.
Vice Chair Guyer,
Here.
Board Member Liu,
Here.
Board Member Kim.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Now would be the time that we would take comments from the public on any item not on the agenda, but having no one here from the public at 8:30 in the morning to speak about anything, we'll move forward to close that portion of the hearing. Are there any agenda changes, additions, or deletions today?
No, thank you.
Great, and having no minutes to approve, we'll move right into our public portion of the hearing for 4281 El Camino, our first item.
Thank you. Good morning.
So hang on just one second, I'll just introduce the item for us. So this is a request for site and design review for the construction of a bicycle pedestrian path on a public access easement on the Panhandle parcel at the rear of Dinah's Hotel property to provide access from Wilkie Way to Summer Hill Homes neighborhood. The project includes various landscaping treatments and decorative elements with outdoor seating areas and lighting for both pedestrian and bicycle use, and requires conditional use permit approval. The zoning district is service commercial with landscape and site and design combining districts. Environmental assessment exempt from CEQA pursuant to sections 15303 and 15304 for new construction of small structures and minor alterations to land. With that, Dalton, please give us the staff report. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Sheldon Austin, contract planner. I've prepared a PowerPoint presentation, a brief one to get through. We also have some other staff members that have been involved with the design of the project. So just a little bit of background overview. The project site is a vacant, unimproved site, very small, 13,200 square foot portion of a larger site that contains the Dinah's Hotel. This is a city-initiated effort to design and construct a pathway between Wilkie Way and Summerhill Homes, Redwood Gate neighborhood. The project has been a subject of a lot of dialogue over the past few years. Initiated at the Planning Commission and Council level, started with the Redwood Gate Elks Lodge development, acknowledging a need for a connection between these communities, a rezoning of a hotel site, the city obtaining a public access easement over the project site, and involved into 2 community meetings prior to actually this application being filed regarding the project and the design. As a result, the city is prepared now to go forward with this project and implement it. The project was seen by the Planning Commission and recommended approval of the project to the City Council on March 25th. You're probably wondering, why is this project here before the ARB? It's on the face of it a minor project, but as I mentioned, it has had a lot of public dialogue, and there was a lot of concerted effort to have the site zoned in such a way that would provide for maximum amount of public input, and therefore also limiting the types of uses that could be used on the site. In the end, what we have is a connection that required review by the Planning Commission, included a conditional use permit, and as well as looking at the design of some of the elements by the ARB, and all of this recommendation will go to the City Council as the final decision authority. As part of the architectural review, as you know, there are 16 findings that need to be made. More specifically, those findings would indicate that the project design is compatible with its surrounding, considers its function, and is consistent with the comprehensive plan. And staff has indicated that these findings can be made in the affirmative. So the project is located along Wilkie Way, which is a proposed bicycle corridor. The path will connect Charleston Meadows to the Redwood Gate neighborhood, which includes a small open space and other open space elements, and adjacent to El Camino Real commercial corridor. Otherwise, someone on a bicycle would have to do a roundabout way on Charleston to get to those open spaces. So this is a very safe and unique opportunity for the city to implement this. The site plan itself includes approximately a 100-foot pathway. It's 10 feet in width at Wilkie Way, and it narrows down to 5 feet to get through the gate there, Redwood Gate. The site will include a landscape palette that has trees, drought-tolerant plantings along with sitting boulders and a bench. The path will be lit with bollard lighting to provide safe travel at night. All these elements are city standard elements, so what we're seeking today is some concurrence on the overall design, maybe perhaps not necessarily design of the bollard or the bench, but maybe the situation of it, the location of it, or maybe if an additional amenities, things like that may be warranted. There are a couple of key issues regarding the project, and one of it is aesthetics and compatibility, the other is parking. Regarding aesthetics and compatibility, at present the site is unimproved, and in some ways, given its surrounding, kind of out of place. So what this project, it really does bring together all the elements of the surrounding and frame the site in such a way that transitions the densities and the surrounding neighborhoods. The project will improve the aesthetics of the site with the drought-tolerant plantings and consistent with the surroundings, and the lighted pathway also not be intrusive the way the bollards are placed. The city, as I mentioned before, did conduct 2 neighborhood meetings. There was some concern about parking, so a parking occupancy study was prepared to resolve those comments. The report of that concluded that there was heavy bicycle and pedestrian use of Wilkie Way, and that there was adequate on-street parking within the Redwood Gate community, and the construction of the path will not change the existing parking conditions. So since that time, we've gotten really all positive feedback from the community regarding the project. We did include those letters to you. People that spoke at the Planning Commission meeting that was in favor of the project. Everybody is eager to get the project going. So I think that in part having this public outreach and this process did help this project along. And then also having the 2 community meetings prior to the application submittal was also very helpful. So with that, we do recommend City Council approval of the site and design review and to allow the construction of this project. With that, I conclude my presentation. Again, we have some people from staff involved with the design of the project, and that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. We'll go to the board for any technical questions. So, Board Member Liu, if we could start with you today.
So thank you for the presentation. I have a couple questions. One is just about the tapered width, right? It starts like 10 feet wide and then it narrows down. And I was wondering if there was any way to make that more uniform. I mean, it's a little unusual to do that dramatic of a change within such a short length. I mean, it sets up like an expectation that it's going to be, like if you're entering it and it's 10 feet wide, you sort of expect it to continue at that width, and then all of a sudden you have to go through this tight radius, and yeah.
Thank you. My name is Ruchika Agarwal. I'm Associate Engineer with the Transportation Division. And to respond to your question, we are matching it with the existing sidewalk, which is within the community, and there is a fence along that, and we'll have to do the cutout. So the tapering is so we can match it to the existing existing sidewalk at that point. But at the other locations, we have at the other point we have a 10 feet wide path.
And I didn't get a chance to go back into the Redwood Gate, that sidewalk on the other side in the Redwood Gate section. So is it just, it's a 5 foot wide pathway and that's it? And there's like landscaping or front fence or anything? What is sort of on that side? I mean, it's just like, I mean, it's like 5 feet is just like a sidewalk, right? So we're saying that.
That's correct. That is the sidewalk.
Yeah. Okay. And then at the Wilkie Way edge end of the path, I think you have something labeled like a stop at the sidewalk and the bike path junction. And I think like elsewhere in Palo Alto, usually sometimes we have gates there, not a physical closed gates, but it's like it sort of forces the bicyclists to do like a little S-turn, because otherwise they'll just blow through it, right? And they're not going to stop there. So I was wondering if there's any thought about that. We have them in like Bull Park, at the new Monroe Park bike path behind the Palo Alto Bowl subdivision. I think there's a similar gate there as well. I was wondering if that was a consideration, or if the our pedestrian and bicycle committee had reviewed the plans.
Yes, the Palo Alto Bike Advisory Committee, they reviewed the plans and they provided their comments. They didn't talk about the gate, but we did. They did talk about having a stop sign. The initial design had a bollard, and they were not in favor of the bollard, so that was removed. But the gates were not considered at that point.
Okay, thank you. And then my last question is, does the homeowner directly adjacent to this property, have they reviewed all of the plans? Because I mean, I think that they would be most affected by whatever noise or light or anything that might happen in the Panhandle Park.
They have been notified of all the meetings, and the plans were sent to them. We haven't done a personal meeting with them, but during one of the site visits, I know he's anxious to get this built because right now it's vacant and it's not aesthetically appealing. But to respond to your questions, no, we haven't made a formal meeting with that particular resident owner, but they were invited to all the commission meetings and the community meetings.
Okay, so I think my comment on that is that the other times when we've had like a bike path going right by somebody's backyard or something like that, the issue is usually, the concern is usually like light and noise right against their, right against their property line, especially if it's a backyard. In this case, it's just a side yard, but, okay, so that's all the questions I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Board Member Kim.
No technical questions. And I have no questions.
All right, and then I just have a couple of things that I wanted to ask about. One of them was a meeting with the adjacent neighbor and whether that had occurred, and I think it's critical that you reach out to that person and make sure that a meeting does occur, because that could sideline the entire process here if it comes out with some really serious concerns and the project has to stop because of that. So make sure we get to them before that happens. I know that the path into the neighborhood is this narrow, it's essentially just a walkway that connects a series of front doors, and so it's very narrow. I'm wondering about the same question that Board Member Liu had, having to do with the width of the walkway and how that was designed, and the intent of having this wider entry point that encourages people to start on their bikes, and then a sign deeper into it that says, time to get off your bike and walk. And the path is almost the distance from me to you. It's just not that big an area. And so I'm wondering, why don't we just narrow it up at the throat where you enter this and make it a walking path? And if you want it to bulge out and have more space inside there and the landscape island, do some of that. But was there other design evaluated for this? And why did it come to this?
That's Wilkie Way being the bike corridor, and the site being adjacent to the Wilkie Bridge, which connects to Los Altos, Mountain View area. The study found that there is a large number of bicyclists on this corridor. So the idea was to provide a path that is going to be workable for both pedestrians and bicyclists. There was another design element which was a little bit wider closest to the Wilkie Way, but we also want to restrict any vehicular movement into this path or into this property. So that's why the limit was to have a 10 feet wide and then have a boulder kind of right after that, so it restricts vehicular movement. There is no opportunity to widen the sidewalk within the development, so that's the intent was to kind of match it with kind of taper it down so it matches with the existing sidewalk.
Okay. Thank you. And then one last question for Sheldon. You mentioned the parking concerns that were brought up during the discussions. Were those localized to construction issues, or was it a broader discussion of parking?
It was a broader discussion of parking. And at the time, Redwood Gate was not a built-out community. It was just a concept plan that was approved. So,
this was prior to the construction?
That was prior to that. So they had to do some assumptions in that.
Got it. Okay, that's right. All right, so that's all I had. We don't have anyone here from the public to speak on this. I have no cards, so we'll just move right back to the board for discussion here quickly. So back to you, Alex.
So I just also had a comment on the hexagon report on the traffic, or on the parking. So it attributed the like 100% utilization of the parking, like solely on the high-density housing, which I would call medium-density housing. But and I just wanted to add a note that there's no street parking on Charleston or parts of Arrested as well. So any of the homeowners and like who live right on there, if they have an extra car or whatever, they're also going to be parking like on Wilkie Way. So it's not just the Arbor Real or Redwood Gate. If there are extra cars on the street, it's not only because of that. And I do go by there all the time by bike, and I do understand that there are more cars at both ends of the street. I just know that just by passing through there a couple times a week. But I wanted to add that it's not just in general. There are not more cars on Wilkie Way than on any of the other neighboring streets, because I cut through there all the time on all of those streets, and there's nothing really that unusual, in general, in the overall pattern of that. I think also the hexagon reports sort of suggested that maybe as many as like half of the people who go down Wilkie Way and turn left on Charleston, right, headed west, like up to half of them are going to use this path to go through Redwood Gate and Arbor Real, and I think that's high. I mean, if they're trying to sort of estimate a maximum, I think that's fine to use that as a maximum, but once you go through there, it doesn't connect to anything else. So like, it seems to me to assume like half of the bicyclists and pedestrians are going to go through there. It seems kind of like a bit of a stretch to me. And then I think that my other comment is, ideally, we wouldn't have to make the turn at the end of the path to get into Redwood Gate. Like, I would just in pure design, I would rather you be able to see all the way through connection from Wilkie Way to whatever street is in Redwood Gate. It's a security thing. Like, people want to get a clear shot, and they want to see if there's anybody in there. And so in a way it's disappointing, but I think this is a very important connector, and I wish like a connector had been planned sort of integral within all of the Arbor Real Redwood Gate thing from the very beginning. I think all of the landscaping is appropriate. All of the native plants and stuff is all seems all perfectly fine and all and acceptable. I would I think I do understand the boulder in the middle of the path. I do understand that, to try to restrict cars from entering the path. I mean, normally I would not want to put something like that in the middle of a bike path. But I think in this case, I think it's perfectly acceptable, and I think it's better than having than the metal posts right in the middle of the bike path. So, and I think I do like the, on the lighting, I do like the bollards. Normally, with Public Works, I think we've usually had like a pole-mounted fixture with the light shining down. I mean, we haven't normally looked at like bollards, but I think in the past, Public Works hasn't been willing to do them, is my understanding. I don't know, I could be wrong about that. I mean, I think normally you're trying to like limit the number of different types of light fixtures that have to be maintained within the city. But anyway, I think these all, the light fixtures look fine. And then I think my last comment was on the decomposed granite. So sometimes, you know, it can whatever, spread onto the paved parts of the sidewalk. So there's a maintenance issue with having the DG right next to the concrete. So like if you're walking on the DG, you know, and you'll track it onto the concrete. But otherwise, I think this is all good, and I think I can support the findings for this project. But thank you.
Board Member Liu. Oh, excuse me. Board Member Kim.
Thank you for your presentation. Just a couple quick comments. Personally, I think the path reduction marking is actually more appropriate before the path actually narrows, so that somebody on their bicycle is actually aware that the path is going to narrow, rather than having the sign saying get off your bike and then having markings showing that the path is narrowing. I've been going back and forth between the width of the path. I think currently the way that it is, if the path is really only leading to the park, I don't know if it's appropriate that this become an actual bicycle path. I think, you know, bicyclists, if they're gonna go from one point to another, they wouldn't really go through the park, and they'd just go the existing route down Wilkie and over on Charleston. And so it seems a little bit strange that we would have to have this width to accommodate bicyclists when they're, you know, gonna have to immediately get off their bikes. I mean, I think it's pretty common sense that if you're gonna go on a narrower path, if the path were narrow all along this park, that you'd get off your bike and walk it. And that's kind of the other way around too, is, you know, for instance, I live very close to the 101 pedestrian bridge, and that's a route where you're not supposed to ride your bike, but everybody does anyways. So even if it narrows down and there's a sign that says get off your bikes, I'm sure there's gonna be a lot of people that are gonna continue to ride their bikes. So to kind of be wishy-washy and say, well, you shouldn't ride your bike because it's too narrow, but we're gonna give you the option to stay on your bike as you come in, seems a little bit difficult to navigate for me. However, realizing that in the Hexagon Transportation Report that there really aren't bicyclists allowed on El Camino currently, I think in the future as El Camino develops and perhaps there's an opportunity for a bicycle path, that maybe then this becomes an even more important route, and that maybe you know, there really maybe ought to be a full bicycle path through the community, but it's very difficult to, you know, to think on that route and, you know, in the future, and what do we do then? So those are kind of my comments. Some other minor comments that I had. I think the ridges might even be appropriate as you approach Wilkie from the park, so that bicyclists are aware that there's kind of a stop, or that they should be careful, rather than kind of speed straight on to Wilkie. And I think that's it as far as my comments. Thanks again.
Board Member Guyer.
Yeah, I guess I don't have as many concerns as some of my other committee members. It just seems, I guess, an awfully elaborate 100 feet, give or take, to just connect a small walking path to the street. I don't have a problem with the way the transition works. I think it makes sense doing it at the corner there, where you're going to slow down, hopefully, when you start to make the corner. And either if you don't get off your bike, you're still going to slow down before you hit the 5-foot path. So I'm fine with approving it the way it is.
All right, thank you. So I'll just state very briefly, I live in Monroe Park, just on the other side of the Wilkie Bike Bridge. I'm far enough away that I don't need to recuse myself from the discussion here. But I do walk up and down the street, you know, 4 days of the week, probably, as we're walking around. And so I'm very familiar with this area. And I want to just go back to the path that was built behind the new housing at the Palo Bowl site. There was a very nice agreement between the neighbors and the developer, and a path was put in that connects Monroe with Cesano. And almost immediately after that was built, there were homeless that took up residence on that path, literally sleeping on the path, couldn't get them moved. It became enough of a problem that my children who ride to school using that path would not use the path. And so I'm concerned about that and how that might occur on this particular site. I think that the comments that Alex made about the bollards are really appropriate here. I think I'd like to ask that you take a look at some really high-tech lighting that has very carefully controlled cutoff and will create pools of light right on the pathway that would be unpleasant enough to stay on, or stay under, that you wouldn't want to sleep there at night or hang out there, you know, controlled in a way that it won't bother the neighbor, is what I'm trying to say. Sorry, I'm mucking around with that a little bit. In addition to that, I think that the other issue that I'm quite concerned with is sightlines up the path. That's the other issue on the Monroe-Cesano path, is that it's got a bend in the middle of it, which everyone felt was important to slow people down a little bit and to control the movement. But what ended up happening is you can't see up the path. And so you don't know the guy's there until you're already on the path. And so while I very much like the idea of the boulder and the little island, I think what it does is it makes it so that you can't see into the site. And it's not a very long site, and it's not far to see, but I think it's something that I would ask you to potentially reconsider. That although it's a nice design element, I think it will decrease the safety of the site, because what occurred on the Cesano court is this guy would just lay flat on the path, and he was hard to see. There's a little hump, it was hard to see. And so I'd just like you to think about reevaluating that potentially. Did you have something you wanted to add?
Well, I was just going to speak to the boulder and then in the planting in that area. So the idea was that the boulder and the planting got no higher than 1.5 feet tall. So it is fairly low. Basically, that boulder is there to stop any vehicles from driving up that pathway. So we could use some other type of obstacle there. I think the boulder is a more organic and aesthetically pleasing element than just a pole. So definitely the sightlines were a big consideration in the design of the planting, as far as the planting along the pathway, and definitely the sightline back to where the link to the community, where it narrows down to 5 feet, so you could from Wilkie Way get a clear visual of the full sightline of that. So there was nothing hiding in those areas or on the path. So
okay, you know, my experience has been that 18 inches high is enough for someone like that to lay behind. And so I'd like to suggest that there might be a different option for how that works. Honestly, I wouldn't mind a bollard, you know, something that's a dark color bollard and it's just simple and clean, and allow the rest of it to stay low. I also, I agree with board member, I think it was board member Kim's comments about the placement of the marker that says to get off your bike. I think that by the time you get to that marker, it's too late. Are the ribs that you're showing across the sidewalk actually texture that will, you know, you go over that and sort of the speed bumps like you have headed towards the Bay Bridge, or how will that work?
The proposal was to have it only striped and not have any deflection.
Okay.
So just the different colored stripes.
Great, okay, so I'm not in favor of having deflection at all, but I think that perhaps, you know, in light of the fact that it's unlikely people are really going to get off their bikes, I think we should just recognize that it's also unlikely that the sign really matters. We should put it there, and it's the right thing to do, and people who are paying attention will get off their bikes and walk. But maybe it's better to move it back to this area, where it's in the lane of traffic for people that are headed that direction, and it you know, fully covers that portion of the path, and it's far enough away that you'd slow down and get off your bike before you get to the spot where it narrows. I like that the path has a tight turn to it. I think, you know, just we're connecting to an existing path, and you could have swept that farther back and had the bigger turn. I think it's better that it be shorter. And then I think the only other comment that I have is that I think that one bench is not enough. I think that, the goal is to make this a place that is really beautiful. You're spending a lot of time and effort designing it and approving it, and it will be nicely maintained, I'm sure. And I'd very much like to suggest that if you have one bench, all it takes is one person to sit there and nobody else will use the entire park. And I think that you probably need 3. I think it's, it's nice to have them in odd numbers just for how aesthetics work. And so I'd like to suggest that whatever needs to be done in order to accommodate more seating in that area so that other people can enjoy it as well. So with that, I think we're looking for a motion. Anyone prepared to do that? Or shall I? Go ahead.
Well, how do we want I guess the question is, if we want revisions, then do we want it to come back to the board, or do we want it to come back to the subcommittee?
I don't think the revisions are that drastic that we need to come back. Do you? I mean, I'm assuming, let's say, moving the indicator back and possibly adding a couple of benches, but I mean, other than that.
Yeah, I mean, I think we provided some recommendations about lighting and some benches and moving the indicator, but other than that, it seems like there was pretty unilateral support for the project.
Okay, then I will make a motion that we approve the project with the following conditions. That an alternate light pole be considered with a downlight. What do we call it? What do they call them? Restrictors?
Yeah,
I forget what they call it.
With the cutoff feature.
The cutoff, yes, thank you for that. That the height of the boulder be reconsidered to be lower than 18 inches. That the number of benches be reconsidered to 3, or at least 3, and then the placement of the bicycle dismount sign be relocated.
I'll second that.
Great. So any discussion?
Well, the only thing being, I could see the rationale behind the height of the boulder and everything else. Maybe if we're increasing the lighting in that area, maybe it's eliminating your concern of seeing someone behind that little island, if you want to call it. Because I think if you make that too flat, it's sort of useless even having it there.
Well, it sounds to me like the purpose of the boulder was really just to slow people down and create an element that would
But I'm saying
divide
if you
the
make the
walkway.
thing 6 inches, I got plenty of friends with trucks that'll, say wet boulder.
Okay.
So I mean, so I'd rather see it if that's the case. Like I said, put light, increase the lighting a little bit so that when you're even approaching it closer, you can see anything in that area. Because that's your main concern, right? Is the fact that, as you said, somebody laying back there.
It is, but a bollard closer to the entry point.
Well, that's true. That's fine too. But I meant either one way or the other. I don't know lowering the, only lowering the boulder would really do what it's intended to do.
Yeah, I think what I was suggesting was that they look at some other methodology for.
Okay.
I mean, I think the conventional thing that's on all other bike paths is the bollard in the middle of the path. And I think you had mentioned like a dark color. And I think my only comment is there's a certain point, like twilight, where they're actually invisible at a certain time, especially if it's in like a concrete or an asphalt path.
You're absolutely right about that.
So usually there's some reflective stripe or whatever added to it. So why don't we revise the boulder just to say that like an alternate form of an alternate traffic barrier.
Board Member Kim, is that acceptable?
I think it's acceptable, but if I recall, originally a bollard was there, but the Palo Alto Bicycle Advisory Committee advised against it. Could you give us a little bit more information on why that was?
That's right. There are some instances where they're not very comfortable with having 3 feet. The proposal was to have a 3 feet bollard and to restrict the vehicular movement inside the path. And they preferred a boulder kind of integrated with the landscape to be a better choice. And they're not in favor of the 3 feet high bollards, I'm sorry.
So I respect their opinion about that, but I think that security is an overriding concern. And we do have plenty of precedent where there are bollards on paths all over Palo Alto. And I have to say, I'm not in favor of the recommendation that they've made, and I think we should reevaluate this for a bollard.
Yeah, I agree, mainly because also, I mean, twofold. First of all, I think it's a security, I mean, or I should say, almost a comfort level that when you go on a path and you see a big bollard, figuring you're not going to run into a truck or a vehicle have it behind you. Also, if you lower that boulder, which is supposedly a seating boulder, to, let's say, 12 inches, that's going to become a rather uncomfortable seat for the average person. So, I mean, it's defeating the purpose of what it was there in the first place.
Okay, yeah, I'm fine. I just wanted to get a little bit additional information on why their decision was such.
It's just not a big bicycling path. If it was a significant bicycling path, I'd say fine. I'll agree with their concerns, but the fact is, 40 feet down the path, you got to get off your bike anyway.
Right, I agree.
So, what's the difference? All right. So with that, let's vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Great, that passes 4-0-0-0. Thank you very much for your time and the nice design work. Really appreciate it.
You know, they would sit down and clap and then. Okay, so this.
We're moving on to a study session now for,
This isn't even an official study session, right?
it is. Yeah, so
Did
our
I miss the paperwork then?
No.
here.
Go ahead and,
We have a
Your
difference
agenda.
between a study session and preliminary.
But I mean, there was no written.
go
That's a
ahead and
study.
announce the item, and then ask me to, please.
Perfect. So on our agenda, next we have a study session for 1700 Embarcadero Road, Ming's Restaurant Site. Request by Deke Snyder of Gensler to present and discuss concepts for a new Mercedes dealership. No formal application has been filed for the project. Amy, could you explain for us the difference, please,
Yes.
between a study session and a preliminary review application?
Absolutely. The study session is not an application type. A preliminary review is an application type that people pay for and have formal comments from the Development Review Committee, which is our internal staff of different departments' comments. That's a more thorough process that we have some expectation for, some solid direction to be given. A study session is typically, a city project or a project that is of great importance to the city that we want to just have an early, sit down and discuss some concepts and some ideas. This is not an application. There is no expectation for formal comments at this time. There's been no staff analysis of the proposed, of the concept plans that have been delivered to you. So we did not prepare a report specifically for that because there was not, a lead time for us to do so. So the expectation today is that the Mercedes dealership and representatives, an architect that we have in the back, another representative will come to the front and present the concept. I don't know, do we have a PowerPoint or no?
I have electronic, I could send to you at this moment, but we have the
Okay. So, typically a study session is one where we sit around this table or, stay up there is fine because it's kind of a higher profile discussion. I think it would be more appropriate to stay as we are.
Right.
And have a discussion about the constraints of the project site. There's probably curiosity about the Mings, what happened to the Mings project, I can tell you about that, but you could also read it in the paper. The Mings owner did get an unsolicited offer for this dealership, and so, and I'm here, of course, to answer your questions. I also wanted to mention that Sheldon, who is staying here for this item, would be the project planner once an application is filed. So we have him here. I also wanted to, on my left is Matt Weintraub, which some of you know already. He is the Historic Resources Board liaison, and as Russ has been out of commission here because he's across the street at the Development Center, I've asked Matt to help me, to step in to help me. In particular, I need some assistance on this ARB Design Awards, which is above and beyond the normal workload for me. So I'm really happy to have Matt joining me today.
We're all happy to have Matt joining us here today.
Yes.
Thank you for your participation. So one other just a clarifying point from the difference between a study session and preliminary review, as I understand it, I think you touched on this, but it's important, is that the preliminary goes through DRC, and all of the other departments have an opportunity to take time, evaluate the project, provide feedback and concerns and sort of heads up. And with the study session, it really is just contained to planning.
Correct. There's been no vetting of this project plan set or anything else by other departments, and even not fully by the planning department for this plan set.
So our goal today is to have a much more free-form discussion. It's not structured. There are no results that come out of this other than some commentary that we provide to the applicant about how the board as a group might, or individuals might feel about a project like this at this site with the character and scale, aesthetic and quality that they're describing.
And maybe some guidance as to what you would like to see come back with respect to, views, drawings, and anything. And we do have a list of requirements, but if there's something in particular for this project that you'd like to have a visual on for the formal submittal,
great.
That's always
so without a
great.
Staff report on this, right? We just go right to the
staff
applicant,
report, right?
So if you wanted to come forward, please come join us. I think you can come sit up at the table here with Sheldon, and we will initiate our discussion here with
So joining us here is Deeg Snyder. He represents Gensler, and Steve Emsley, former planning director for the city of Palo Alto, that's working on the project as well.
Come on up. I want you to have the opportunity to use the mic if you need to, Steve. So Deeg, if you wouldn't mind, would you just walk us through the set that you provided for us, point out anything you think is important for us to really understand, and if there's particular areas that you'd like feedback on, it'd be great if you could illustrate that for us. No, actually, you need to turn on because we're being recorded and
I got you.
Transmitted to millions of people all over it.
Eagerly listening at home. What I thought I could do initially was to give a bit of the background on the project in context of what some of the precedents are for what we're talking about. Excuse me, I'm recovering from a cold, and being on an airplane has not been helping it. The project that have drawn, that you guys have copies of, is a variation of what is an ongoing global prototyping scheme by Mercedes-Benz. So this is referred to, and sometimes maybe you'll find if you're researching it, AutoHouse is a design methodology around their building designs for their retail environments globally. This is its DNA sort of is in the Bauhaus aesthetic, exposed structural members, very much a glass and steel articulation in most cases. There are examples of these projects which we've done in various cities which incorporate other types of materials on the exterior, ranging from stuccos, metal panels, concrete construction. It does have variation based on the location, but historically it's a prescriptive design guideline, which means it has elements which they require as part of the manufacturer's guidelines to meet this aesthetic for their retail environments. So not entirely unlike an Apple or an Audi, for instance, which has aesthetic components of their building. So the challenge in this particular case is that Mercedes-Benz has been actively trying to pursue finding an opportunity to put a project here in the Palo Alto area for a number of years. There have been limited numbers of sites available. The growth of population, of course, is one of the concerns that they look at for size, scale, projections of sales, and so forth of vehicles. All of those factors then contribute to a program which they are simply looking into the crystal ball in urban sciences and saying in a 10-year window, this would be a projected size of project. The project is very compact and has moved to more of a vertical dealership model, which is something which is becoming more and more consistent in urbanized areas. The opportunity for 10 to 12 acre sites in the urban areas where they want to reach their customers is no longer a reality. So operationally, these buildings have had to change from very low 1- and 2-story buildings which sprawl out across multiple acres and have all the vehicles displayed on the surface parking into what now is a reality of more vertical buildings utilizing elevators, car elevators, internal building ramps and so forth, where everything is simply brought up into multi-story examples. So this project began with the potential to engage this client that has the current Ming's restaurant. The site is roughly 2.5 acres. So based on preliminary discussions with the city, our client had had asked Genzer and myself to look at viability studies, primarily in the building planning aspect, as to whether or not there's an example of a program which both meets the manufacturer's requirements, the business model that they need, and would fit within the calculated FAR requirements and restrictions of the building on the site. And that's what's really happened over the course of the last month and a half. And then this has progressed into developing what was initially white study model type of 3-dimensional images to look at what those building masses might be. Those were presented to the planning, and we took some initial feedbacks, and we're given quite a bit of good feedback from planning on other aspects and considerations within the community with respect to glazing, some of the very specific restrictions on heights of glazing for the automotive overlay, which is presumably where this project would ultimately would wish to have this would be going through a rezoning process for automotive retail. And the outcome is really a preliminary set of renderings in the rear. So we'll work through the plans, and then I actually do have one set that I'll hand out to you guys. Last week, we had an opportunity to give a preliminary presentation to Mercedes-Benz Corporate, who ultimately also are at another level involved in approvals on the client side. So I would like to give you guys a new copy of some elevations which have a few comments that they had suggested that we try to at least have the discussion about as regards to their signage. So if we just want to start on the first page based on the footprint, the building is currently bound by the restrictions of what we've identified as an emergency circulation around the building as a minimum, surface parking, and the restricted easements around the overhead power lines. This yields about a 35,000 square foot floor plate on the ground. The primary circulation of the building, the traffic pattern, if you guys are familiar with the way the Ming's restaurant's working now, it's a unique intersection. It does have a number of challenges, but we really identify that the frontage road is really the primary access point to the site. The use of Embarcadero really is for potential exiting traffic only, and really only right-hand out lane only. I mean, this site effectively only has one point of entry in our mind off of the frontage road section. The congestion of the rest of the intersection is so dense, and the turn radiuses and turn angles are such that it really makes a secondary entry point really for emergency use only in all reality. Therefore, the majority of the congestion of the building, if you will, the oncoming and offgoing traffic is oriented to the bottom right-hand corner. So we'd like to move to the second page. This is shown, unfortunately incorrectly, as level 2, but it's level 1. So that is the ground floor plane. That is the map that shows the service arrival as the primary element at the bottom of the page. Is the the primary focus of the public environment is on the ground floor. You have the service arrival, at which point every vehicle is valeted. It's brought either onto the site temporarily, moved up through elevators to one of the multiple levels, whether it's going for service, whether the customer is there just to do, more of an extended meeting with someone at the building. And every bit of the sales and new car delivery and finance and all of the services typically found at the dealership all occur on the ground floor. So this is in part due to the way that the code has a 0.4 FAR with a 0.2 up to a 0.2 bonus category for only showroom environment. The 0.2 being everything that is in tan is envisioned to be a primarily open environment where both sales and car display and everything is intermixed. So it's consistent with their design guidelines that they really are looking for, this is Mercedes speaking, is a very open plan concept where the vehicles are more arranged kind of around the plan rather than having a formal showroom environment at the front of the building and segregated sales and business options at the rear. Second floor, if we can work through that, becomes the administrative level of the building. This provides both balcony condition looking into the double height space at the front of the showroom. The bulk of this plan area is for the employee and customer parking. And then, as I mentioned, the administrative functions, conference rooms, break rooms, and a large outside terrace and patio space. This terrace patio space is one of the elements in early discussions with the planning department of looking at the building in more of a subtractive manner, carving away levels as we move up to the building to try to reduce massing of the building somewhat, and look for opportunities to get places where we can get some exterior space that both the customers and the employees can enjoy. The following page on the third floor is historically what you would find behind the dealership. This is your service department. So all of the vehicles which are being serviced in the building actually would be stored and moved to the third floor. And this is, again, conventionally speaking, this is not the ideal, but this is the reality of what we do in urban environments for vertical dealerships. Most of this environment is a closed workshop area. It has natural light, but it's mechanically ventilated. So we have all the obvious code implications of meeting all the requirements for air and so forth. But this is historically a lesser demand for natural light. The too much natural light in a workshop environment is counterproductive for technicians working on vehicles. So when we do get to the exterior elevations, you'll notice that on this level there are not as many penetrations, primarily because of the use on this floor. And then the last page is the rooftop, which has been designed and shown as the reality of what they would probably park. This is a high density, everything is valeted by staff, so this is really a high density parked environment where, again, we would be using for some inventory vehicles which are waiting to be worked on and customers in that case. So a few of the considerations as we move through the elevations are available here on the next page. The auto house design guidelines, as they're prescribed by Mercedes-Benz, is really a series of design elements. So the way in which you articulate columns is prescriptive. They're black in color, painted finish. They have a fluted top to them. It's not my personal aesthetic preference, but it's something that globally they use as a design aesthetic. The utilization of exposed structural beams with a punched hole at the end of them and a 45-degree canted edge is something which is a prescribed structural element that they use. Thin metal edge ceiling or roof edge, which is, in our case, about a 10-foot deep projection from the building. It doesn't serve, unfortunately, in our particular orientation as any type of real benefit for solar cutoff or sun means, but it is one of the elements of the building which they ask for. And then moving through some of the other pieces, they have certain ways in which they apply their signage to the columns and apply signage on the building. So what I've shown in this set of plans was the initial suggestion to Mercedes, which was to limit the logo placement to a single corner element. They've come back and they've asked for a revision to that, which I have. I'll give it to you guys in just a moment. So moving through the building, the majority, as I said before, the exterior of the building, with respect to not being an entirely glass building, has chosen to sort of apply glass where it's most effective, where it sort of meets the code in terms of the showroom heights of glass and so forth, being a 20-foot maximum on the front of the building. And it does tend to have a bit of a more opaque sense to it. We feel like this is more indicative of kind of like being authentic to what's inside programmatically. We put windows where we can gain benefit, and where we don't, we've kept it solid. There's a building section that was provided at the request of the planning department to show the building section schematically as to where, and this also keys back to the site plan. We do not anticipate pole lighting or any type of upper surface lighting, meeting code minimums, but maintaining a high parapet, top of parapet being 50 feet, so that there's cutoff and no view of vehicles from either on-site or from the street. This site actually has a very nice mature row of trees on two sides. It does have the large the tower in the corner at that intersection. So the building design is not about trying to overexploit the contents inside. It is indicative of luxury product, which is primarily a destination retail. So whether the building is fully glass or non-fully glass, the desire for the product typically drives the traffic to it, not visibility from a particular corner. So there hasn't really been a particular strategy put forth to intensify a view angle from the corner, from the intersection, from any particular elevation on the street. It's simply looking at where, upon customer arrival, makes sense to have an identified front door, which we believe is facing not the Embarcadero side, but the frontage road side. This has also been as a result of where we feel we can realign the parking strategy. Right now it has a one-way parking scenario around the front of the building, which is not a highly effective use of that, and we really want to maintain the fire access all the way around. So we've actually reduced surface parking in the front where the customers are now, and limited that fewer. So we may want to just flip. The next few pages are axonometrics that just show kind of the building massing. Shouldn't be nothing that's surprising. I will grab the revised renderings for you. So if I could just hit kind of an order two topics of signage followed by materiality, I think I can stop speaking. I'm very interested in your opinions about this. And just, the initial proposal was to try to limit and identify the signage in a more minor fashion in the corners. The response back from Mercedes, and this is the Auto House program, if you were to Google this today, you would find that the building looks almost exactly like this all around the world, except it is blue instead of black. So there has been a change that has started in about 12 months ago to convert the overall image of the building from a blue, silver, white, and gray scheme to a black. So they simply substituted black for blue. The elements at which they changed were the columns, the blade sign, which is historically a vertical element that they prefer to have attached to the building rather than an independent pylon sign. And I was hoping to edge them towards not doing the vertical element, but trying to do this simple small piece in the corner. Their response was, we need you to at least propose the vertical and then tell us whether or not anyone agrees with you in Palo Alto. So what the revisions are really to relocation of the white star to the stair element in the corner, and then on the corresponding other corner, which would be facing oncoming traffic coming up the frontage road, on the side of that stair tower, introducing a panel which would be coplanar, would be black in color, it wouldn't have the white star. Now the star elements in previous schemes for Auto House were illuminated box signs applied to the building. They've now revised that signage typology to be a laser cut push-through acrylic. So this is a bit more like what you may find in Apple product stores. It's a internally illuminated, it's a glowing white surface, so its light emission is less than a box sign, but they believe that the contrast between the white and the black is stronger. So with respect to the rest of the front of the design, again, they're sort of the Bauhaus approach, and in a traditional sense, they expose all the steel, they expose the steel in the interior, they expose the mechanical systems. It's really a refined but celebrated industrial building, and that is kind of their DNA globally. So we were just discussing this morning on materiality again, a mostly muted white, silver, and gray, tones of gray type of palette for them, with clear glass and again, minimal signage. So if you had any specific questions, I'd be happy to answer those. And again, I can also make I brought on my iPad, I asked them to provide a few examples of current projects that have been completed, which I just got by email in the last day or so, which I'm happy to forward those on as well if you'd like to see some of those. Stevens Creek actually has a product that has just been completed in the last year. It may have been a conversion between the blue to black scheme, but their current building does actually have many of these same elements if you're looking for an example close by.
Amy or Sheldon, do we have a way to plug in his iPad with the stuff
I'm happy
behind
to
us?
simply hand it, I'm happy to give it to you and you guys can scroll through if you'd like to.
Why don't you forward that on to us
Okay.
for review later? That's fine. I think we have enough information, at least I do, in order to provide some feedback
sorry,
here.
that's my dog.
Before we get started, though, I have a couple things I wanted to just do. Amy, could you tell us, I think part of what was mentioned here was rezone for auto retail. There was a bit of discussion about rezoning for auto retail for this site.
Yes.
Could you explain anything you have?
Definitely. There's an auto dealership overlay zone, actually, combining district that they would be asking for as part of their project. So in addition, the site is already zoned with the D overlay. So, basically, and because it's in this sensitive area, basically, we would take this all the way through Planning Commission and ARB and Council, Planning Commission and ARB for the rezone, and then because the site and design process would be the operative process, which they are, as you know, is included. So as far as the zoning of AD, it does allow an additional 0.2 FAR above the CS, underlying CS zone, which this is currently a CS zone.
Would they be permitted to do this project under the current zoning?
No, because they would need to, auto dealership is not permitted in the straight CS, it needs the AD overlay. Plus, they are asking for the, up to 0.2 ground floor showroom additional FAR.
But
that's only allowed through the AD overlay.
The reason I'm asking this is I want to get to a specific point here, which is that they're not doing this to ask for the additional FAR. They're doing this, they need to rezone because they can't build a project like this at this site without the rezoning.
Correct.
And a side benefit of that is that there's some additional FAR that's granted as a result of that. But
yeah.
regardless, they couldn't do this project without the rezone.
Correct. It's a legislative act to allow an auto dealership owner,
Okay.
an auto dealership at this location.
And then, so we are going to go around the board here as many times as we need to, but I would like to just ask, although it's a little bit out of what we typically comment on, because this is going to PTC and council, I'd like the board's comments about whether you feel this is an appropriate use of this site as well, the idea of the rezone, and whether you think that a building like this contextually fits on this site and whether this use is compatible with this area. All right, so just working our way down the line here. Board Member Kim, will you start us off today?
Sure. Thank you for your presentation. I'll just start by answering Chair Pop's initial question. I think it is appropriate. It's actually fairly close to where I live, so I know that Audi is actually currently constructing their new showroom, and of course there's the Honda dealership beyond that. Yeah, does that answer your question? Yes. And then as far as just kind of, are we doing full addition? Any comments or, okay.
We're just in a study.
Yeah.
We're just in a study session today, so we're going to go around the board, and then I just received one card from the public, so at some point here we'll get to that.
Yeah, maybe just a comment is that it's a really tough site. That power pole, and I mean, I remember when Ming's was, you know, very popular, and Scott's was still across the street before the Stanford Eye Center, and I think it makes sense to have something like this because there is existing auto dealerships down the street. As far as some other basic comments regarding the material that you've given us here, it's a handsome building. I can appreciate that Mercedes is taking on this approach of the auto house and going with, you know, Bauhaus aesthetics. I definitely think it needs some review, and, you know, with a formal application, I'm sure that planning and staff will have their own comments as well. But just kind of as a quick, you know, taking a look at this, I think it could work. I appreciate Chair Pop's question about the .2 FAR, and if that was just something that tagged along with it having to change the zoning, because I think that would be, you know, a question that would appear later on. Other than that, the signage, I guess I'm also in favor of the original signage, the horizontal signage on that corner as opposed to this tall blade sign. I think it also does something to the character of the building because it is on the most public corner that, well, as before, I realize it's only an egress stair that had the windows, but I think it still feels much more inviting and open to the public rather than having this tall blade sign that kind of covers that and makes it appear to be a little bit less friendly to the public. But yeah, thanks for your presentation. I really appreciate you walking us through it and kind of giving us the whole scope of the project. And I think that's it for now. Maybe if we have a second round, I'll have some additional things to say.
So that's great. I'm going to take a quick break here and ask Mr. Borak to come give us his comments so that we can include that in our understanding of the project in our discussion. So, Mr. Borak, if you could step to the mic, introduce yourself, and we'll give you 3 minutes.
All right, thank you, Chair Pop, and good morning, board members. I gather we're talking about 1700 in Barcadero. I came in late, and I didn't get to hear any kind of staff presentation or preliminary, but I guess preliminary is the good word because the municipal code has a procedure for payment of a fee. The municipal code has a procedure for the payment of a fee for a preliminary review before the ARB, at which an application for the preliminary review is filed with materials rather than just something handed out, and the first time anybody sees them, in this case, the board and the staff is here, and certainly there's no copies of the public. Also, I understand from the press that there is currently a valid project for this site. And it seems to me that that should be withdrawn before you take a look at another application. And finally, I've been in recent years at these board meetings and at the Planning and Transportation Commission, where the board and commission members are admonished by staff not to talk about something that's not within their purview, such as telling the Architecture Review Board that they shouldn't be talking about planning issues, which is what you're talking about. In regard to preliminary applications, the intent and the enforcement of it at the beginning was essentially looking at the ideas and discussions that you're having this morning on this project or potential project. It is only when applicants continued to violate that and essentially bring in a preliminary review detailed work as if they're doing a real application that and staff permitted it and the board permitted it, that the staff and board invented study sessions. There is no such thing as a study session in the municipal code. And it would seem to me it would make more sense to do two things. One, the property owner has to make a choice of which project the property owner wants. Can't have two projects for the same property coming before the city. It's either going to be its hotel project or it's going to be the auto dealership, but not both at the same time. The second thing is to go back to what the municipal code says, which is this level of development with the choices is what is unambiguously discussed in the code for a preliminary review, and have a preliminary review be what it really is supposed to be, and only have one after an applicant pays the fee for a preliminary review and provides the materials for that, and not do something more detailed for preliminary reviews, therefore requiring an invention of a study session which is not in the municipal code. Thank you.
So, Mr. Bork, it's not our common practice to respond to public comment, but in this particular case, because you missed the initial discussion that we had about what the purpose of this review is, and your comments were largely in response to that, what I'd like to do is ask Ms. French to give you some context about what the purpose of this review is, because we are not conducting a preliminary review. We're conducting a study session. It's a very different methodology.
Okay, first thing, I'll just deal with the Ming's Hotel project. So that project is basically dead in the water. The permit has expired. The entitlement process was completed with council approval of the project. However, because the building has not commenced, that is no longer a viable project on the site. They would have to reapply and go through the whole site and design process again. So this second point, this is not an application. There's been no money paid to the city to take on an application at this site. Therefore, this falls into the realm of other matters the ARB might find to take up. That is in the code. I can't quote it at the moment, but there is the authority that the ARB can discuss other matters of importance, and this is the city feels is a matter of importance. As far as, this is an important site. It is a change of use from what's been approved but no longer valid, the hotel. It's still the same zoning, CS. It's just with the overlay, which, Chair Pop had asked that question about, does it seem like an appropriate use? It is not in the ARB's purview, but it's not that there's a restriction that they can't talk about these things. It's just that what the ARB says about the land use is not part of the record going forward that influences the Planning Commission and Council on the land use matter. I think that takes care of it.
That's great, thank you. And I'll illustrate that the reason I asked about whether the board might support the idea of changing the zoning for this site really has to do with this broader question of context and compatibility, which is in the forefront of our discussions recently. And I think it's very important for us to provide feedback to an applicant. Mr. Bork, I'll also just describe quickly that any hesitation you might have about this type of a process, I think, is misplaced. I think that the real benefit here is that we have an applicant who is thinking about a project. It's actually not an applicant, right? It's an initial discussion in consideration of a potential project that is coming into the public forum earlier than it naturally would have. And it gives everyone an opportunity to get more involved and understand more about it at an earlier stage. And I think that I myself am really appreciative of the approach that you're taking and the fact that you're exposing us to your initial thinking and your initial process in this, even in advance of actually filing an application. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Chair Powell, because you remind me that I saw something similar like this at 27 University Avenue. Thank you.
All right. So with that, we'll move on to Board Member Guyer.
Okay. As to your first question, I don't have a problem with this type of project here. I think that it works where it, for the type of thing. And again, it's as you mentioned, the whole concept of the funky little building with 8,000 cars parked on a massive lot just is gone in this neck of the woods. As to, I'll also start the initial one, looking at the two of them here. I like your original or whatever the concept for the signage. I'm not a big fan of the other one. The other, I'm guessing these are going to be sort of metal panels or something like that, similar to the dealership in, what is it, San Carlos technically, or Belmont?
The
one along 101?
Yeah, right, the Mercedes dealership up there.
Sure. The
I mean, those are silver, but I meant.
the intent would be to be a matte finish.
Okay, but it's a metal panel concept rather than.
That's one of the viable options. There's multiple rain screen systems, whether they're metal, phenolic resin, similar to the hotel just down the street here, the wood that's actually not wood. But
as compared to stucco.
Well, we do have examples of stucco product that has been approved. Mercedes-Benz of Ontario, which was just completed.
You mean approved by
Mercedes-Benz.
Mercedes, yeah, okay.
Yeah, and many times it comes down to factors of constructability, looking at the environment, looking at durability of material and so forth. So I wouldn't say that, I'd say that they would have a proclivity towards going towards metal as their preferred, but that's still left up to the owner of the business to make recommendations.
So right now, you're just telling me it will be a panelized system. What that panel is finished in is
correct.
You're not really
it
sure.
Could be it could be a stucco. It could be.
No, I understand. Okay, my recommendation would be something a little glossier and high tech than a stucco panel.
Okay.
I'd be more into. I don't mind powder coated, metal or something like that, as compared to an exposed metal panel or something. But I prefer that over stucco.
Okay.
I really don't want to see that kind of a finish on here. Again, I don't have a problem with some sort of wood treatment going along with it, but like I said, I'm not in this sort of design. I don't think stucco is going to work.
Right.
All it does is just cheapen the overall product,
right.
Or at least visually does so. Then the other thing is, and on your rendering, it's a little clearer than the other. Obviously, you have some ideas, again, similar to the dealership up the road, as to lighting. Some concealed lighting. Theirs is actually very intense. If you see it at night, it's got the blue lighting, which really makes a massive statement at night. So if you're doing something that bold, I think we need to see it. Not all of a sudden, guess what, guys? This is what it looks like when it's dark.
Right. The strategy, and we have in other locations, for instance, in Ontario, where you have facing 405 access, we've included lighting more for drawing attention to the building. But that's highway presence, and I think that's a different nature than this.
Well, that's fine. And I'm not saying one is right or wrong. I just, that's a fairly strong statement, so I don't want all of a sudden be surprised that, oh, that's our norm, by the way, but we forgot to tell you that.
No, that's not the general direction right now with the projects. And with respect to cutoff angles and light bleed from buildings and light pollution in general, we've taken a pretty subtle approach on how the lighting, buildings like these don't typically overlight the entire site and building any longer. A lot of it's about internal illumination, so we don't have a lot of exterior lighting of the building and so forth.
Okay.
It has to be low signature.
The overall scheme, I like the design. And again, I like the whole idea of enlarging, for instance, the window area to bring the overall concept of the massing down somewhat. I think one of the weakest parts is that canopy. It's sort of a 5-foot canopy that's 35 feet up or 30 feet up in the air is sort of a weak point. I mean, if you're going to make a statement there, then do so, not this sort of wimpy little, yes, we need a canopy. I don't expect it where it needs to stick out 15 feet, but just something maybe either, a little deeper or something, but a little bit more of a statement. It really becomes obvious in your section that how really small and minuscule it is, wherever that section is.
Yeah.
On sheet, whatever, building section, yeah. I mean, you can see how tiny that, I mean, it looks like there's been some considerable thought given to that canopy, considering the detailing on there, but I don't think it's really doing anything for the building in that scale. As far as the way the other things work, the layouts and everything else, I think makes sense. You might want to change the drawing on level 3. You've got a column going right through the back seat of a car, but other than that, that obviously is not going to be a parking space.
Special deal for that one.
Yeah. But like I said, no, I could, obviously, when we actually get a formal application, there may be some changes, but the overall concept, one interesting point, and I was just in a dealership yesterday, and it's this sort of thing. It's in Daly City. It's not one of yours. It's a Toyota dealership, and I happened to just be. I mean, I wasn't interested in buying a car. I was there for a different reason, and they actually even had a coffee vending area, or not vending, but I mean a whole little boutique area in there. And I thought it might be. I'm not going to tell you how to do the inside of these things, but considering, the whole concept is to bring people in, make it a nice experience, that may be something you might want to consider, that because that was a first for me that I'd seen that. Other than that, like I said, I like the basic concept. I think it's a very good start, other than a couple of those points with the canopy and all. Also, I understand that in lighting is not always great, but I think there may need to be a little bit more thought given to some sort of window treatment on some of the back elevations. So this doesn't become, I've been on the various panels for years, and I've always used the phrase, "The building has 4 sides, not 1 or 2 that the people see, and then the back is sort of oh yeah, that's obviously the back of the building." I think the street view 1 facade, you've really done a nice job on, and it gets a little bit less, even 2's not bad, and then it gets a little bit less on the back side. So I want to see those 4 come, or maybe the 2 back ones come a little bit up in quality to match what you have in the front. I think that's good enough as a start.
Thank you very much. Board Member Liu.
So I have a question quick question for staff. So I was looking on the zoning map, and so on the Ming site, was it not originally a PC, and then was it changed to CS for the hotel? Is that correct?
As part of the hotel application, the council approved CSD zoning, changing it from the PC that was original for the restaurant.
And then also, I was looking at the zoning map, the Audi dealer has the AD overlay, and then I think the adjacent parcel on East Bay Shore, that's an office building or something, also seems to have the AD designation. So I guess I was trying to answer Randy's question, which is, is it appropriate? It seems like if the planning was to have an auto dealer overlay on the 2 adjacent parcels, then it seems logical to extend it over this, to this parcel as well for rezoning.
Actually, if memory serves correctly, I believe the Audi dealership is a planned community. It's a PC that is for an auto dealership. That
that's right.
predates the
Yeah,
AD zone type in our standard zoning code. I don't know about that other site you're mentioning.
I don't know, but I did look on, I was looking at the zoning map. So
Okay.
there are other, it seemed
We'll
like
have to
there
check
were
the
other,
online map.
and my zoning map is old as well, so I don't know how current it is, but yeah, I think mine's like at least 10 years old. But anyway, I think the intent was to, if my memory serves me correct, was to keep auto dealers in Palo Alto, and certain things were rezoned with this overlay to encourage them and to make the zoning work for them. Is that correct? So
That's correct. So the existing dealerships that had just a standard zone, such as CS, which is usually the one, we did rezone to have that AD. A PC that was for auto dealers didn't need the AD, but the code does allow for any new auto dealership that wants to come into town, but it has to be rezoned to AD.
okay, and then my next question for you is, I was looking in the Baylands Master Guidelines, and so it was saying that with the AD overlay, that there's a conditional use permit finding. So it's not just a guideline, right? There's actual a finding that says the design of the proposed improvements and the operation of the proposed use will not be detrimental to the ecological qualities of the Baylands natural areas and will be aesthetically compatible with the character of the Baylands as a regional recreation area and nature preserve. So that seems to me pretty that's significant to me. Is to get a if it's like a 3-story dealer to sort of blend in with the Baylands, it's challenging to me. It seems like if we use the office building across the street, I don't know if that's the right precedence, that the Peary building. It seems like that one, all the landscape areas were designed to try to integrate or mimic, I don't know what you call it, or they take their point of departure for the design from the natural Baylands. So there's some sort of integration. It's not just a suburban area where you're going to roll out 10 feet of sod lawn in front of the building, that there has to be some sort of tie-in to the Baylands area. And then I think also for the materials, I think generally we have all of the, I think it encourages like naturally weathering materials, if memory serves me correct. I didn't look at this. I know we have 2 Baylands documents, right? So I only looked at one. But generally it encourages things more like Corten steel or naturally weathered wood as opposed to like a shiny white aluminum panel or whatever, or black. So I would factor that in. I think I was very encouraged. I was worried about the rooftop parking, but when you mentioned that there would be no pole lighting, I think that's key. Really, that was the thing that popped out in my mind, was having like a building that's taller than all the other buildings and having all these big 15-foot high rooftop poles. Yeah, so that would be to me, if you needed to do that, I would say, oh, you're gonna have to go, I don't know, down or something, or do something else to get the parking. If memory serves me correct, I may be wrong. I think the guidelines encourages like horizontality, and I think that your Embarcadero Road is all vertical elements. I do like your East Bayshore facade, which is generally horizontal. So I would look, I think I would look at that elevation more carefully. And on the vertical sign option that you have here, so we got into a little dispute with our council over a Tesla, and where they had a sign on a vertical element, and there's a debate in the community about what constitutes a sign, the area. So I would just say, I'm just saying, be aware that the vertical thing is a discussion point in the community. And
Now, is that relevant to because I think the evolution of these vertical elements on the building seems to be a response to the fact that the pylon signs are also something that has almost ceased to exist in terms of approvals, and many cities have gone to more monumental signage strategies. So they've taken that vertical element, obviously trying to get the star or the rings or whatever the brand logo is as high on the building as possible. They've simply tried to apply that to the face of the buildings now, and they're saying this is black and this is silver, but the only real sign is the lit part. So we understand. We run into signage is always a very interesting topic with a lot of different approaches and strategies in every city.
Yeah.
But I think for them, I think in finding its position on the building in a place where they may have better visibility versus not is probably their primary concern, followed by this vertical element. So I don't know if that's really a large battle with them.
And I think with us, with the board here, is that we're looking at like the integration of the design and going to like a halo lit or a internally, what do you call it? The cut
Cut
push
out.
through,
Yep.
yeah, cut through, push through letters is way better than an illuminated box by far. I mean, that's to me, that's the biggest, is the biggest benefit. And I think I would encourage you to maybe talk to our city, it's not our city arborist, what is it, urban forestry? So I know that they had a long discussion with the Audi dealership about how to plant trees to fit in with the baylands, but also to address concerns that car dealers have with trees and maintenance and all of that. And I don't know what the complete resolution was over the Audi dealership, but I mean, I think that they came to agreement about something. I mean, they seem to be on the same page about that. So I would definitely encourage you to do that, because you're so close to the Audi dealer that it would be nicer to have some sort of larger landscape idea that all works together instead of having a sort of a patchwork quilt of different suburban landscapes out in the baylands. In general, though, I'm in support of the Part T of the building. I agree with you all about the access and circulation and all of that. That's flawed. I mean, it's challenging. And then as you mentioned, that the whole tower there at the corner is very challenging. And I know that limits tree plantings and whatever that in that whole front zone of the building. I know that's a significant constraint.
If I could just add, one of the initial site strategies was to maintain or reduce where the curb cut, not curb cuts, on this site plan, if you're not, you can actually see the outline of the original parking perimeter. The intent would be to keep every bit of the landscaping along the entire frontage exactly the way it is. So the desire to have, the trees are mature enough that you actually can see underneath them. So if there are vehicles along the frontage road, which is, the dealership will want to have some vehicles on display, but that's really the only front row that there is. There wouldn't be any desire to change or modify any of the landscaping. Matter of fact, it's actually very nice the way it is. We wanted to actually enhance it and add some more on the frontage. So presumably most of what's there seems to feel in conformance with the rest of the streetscape, and those trees are mature. Unfortunately, there was I guess a tree line or a hedgerow or something that was between the Audi dealership and the Mercedes dealership, and on one trip here it was there, and on the next trip down it wasn't there. So
I noticed that yesterday. Yeah.
But obviously with respect to looking at landscaping ordinances and tree species and so forth, the one benefit of having the majority of the cars inside the building versus out on the lot is that trees on the lot aren't as large of a problem. They usually worry about birds and sap and things like that. But in our case, the majority of our vehicles are inside, so that's really not a major issue for us. So.
All right, thank you very much. So, did you speak? Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. Right, you did. I appreciate you coming in for this process. As I've said, I think it's helpful. One quick question for Amy. Is this Baylands? And none of this parcel actually touches Bayland property.
That's correct, but just like the site across the street, the Puri Arriaga site, we do consider it as being, the Baylands master plan design document as being applicable. Certainly it's already developed. It's not a walking path, but the development that does go in there, that does replace what's there, needs to be observant of that document, and ARB and staff and council will be looking at that. Certainly the Mings project that came through did some landscape enhancements along, to improve what's there. And so I would, pass those concepts on and take a close look at what had been approved most recently.
Right, they had found a way to be successful in that.
Yeah,
You might use that as a baseline to start from. I also want to make sure that you're aware of what has been approved recently for the Audi dealership, as the immediate adjacent context, and what is it, 2465 East Bayshore, I think important to include in your future presentation for us. If this comes back as a formal application, I really want to make sure that we see elevations that include both of those parcels and those buildings, and so hopefully there can be some cooperation between you and the folks that have the Audi.
I actually am personal friends with the architect who works on Audi's behalf. We're doing work with him in other cities, so we're familiar. He may not know that we're doing the Mercedes store, although he probably will after he reads or listens to this presentation, but I know who he is personally, so we can reach out to him for some of those rendered elevations.
I think we'd all appreciate that, and I think it'll be important to understand how this building relates to that. So let me just say that I think of anywhere in the city, this is the right place to do a project like this, and I think having projects like this in our city, something that we should all be saying is a good idea. Not necessarily the purview of the Architecture Review Board, but perhaps my own personal opinion. It's interesting, it's a very urban design with the elevators and all the things that you've had to do in order to manage the site, but it's not a very urban site, being next to the Baylands and all these things. It's just a particularly constrained site. And so I very much like what you've done along East Bayshore, this very horizontal emphasis, and I think Alex's point is right about the guidelines. And the Embarcadero frontage for me is a little less successful just because of its verticality. And I think that the signage that is more consistent with what the brand standard is further detracts from that. And so I think you're hearing a consistent tone from all of us that the more modest application of the signage on the building seems more appropriate in this particular instance. I'll agree with Vice Chair Goyer's comments about the materials. I won't say gloss, but I definitely think the matte metal finishes are very consistent with what would be contextual with the next door property and with the type of use that you're planning. Just wondering, is there any treatment for the electrical tower that's possible, or are you completely limited?
From a purely creative standpoint, we'd love to do something with it, but I think we need to explore what we'd be permitted to do. I think there are a few ideas. I mean, obviously, electric vehicle models within Mercedes is going to be a very relevant part of their product line in the future. We'd discussed whether or not we'd be permitted to repaint it, to actually illuminate it. We do in our site plan, we'd begun to investigate whether or not there'd be, it has very low clearance around it, so and there's some restrictions on its proximity, but the ability to actually have a vehicle displayed near it and then it actually be part of the narrative about electric vehicles could be an interesting creative aspect to look into. We need to find out through all the jurisdictions that manage and regulate those pieces of property, would they allow us to, underlight it with an LED source?
I think it'd be very interesting for you to explore that.
That's down the road. That's on the list.
I'll agree that I think the rear of the building at this point is a little severe. and needs a little more attention. I think that the building does have 4 sides, and needs to have equal attention on all 4 sides. And I recognize on the 3rd floor you've got a parts storeroom and some other things going on there, but I'm sure there's some articulation and some variation that can be created that will make the building more interesting and break down the scale of the building along that frontage. Overall, I'll just say I'm quite favorable about the direction that you're heading, and I think that the choices you've made in terms of land use and site organization are very appropriate. The way you've addressed building height seems very appropriate to me. I'm not understanding exactly how you're planning to handle your mechanical equipment. If you've got cars on the roof.
There'd be some loss of parking. We would look at.
Right, and so I'm expecting that you'll come back with some mechanical penthouse or something that might exist up on the roof, unless you're going to create a little mechanical plant someplace else on the site.
No, it's probably a rooftop unit, and we'd centrally locate it on the roof so that the view angles and cutoff were minimized. But depending on once we work through mechanical strategies of what size it would need to be, what style of unit, we could look at. We have some which are very large. We have some that have been broken down into smaller units, and they just depend on what the mechanical engineers really are expecting the loads to look like in this particular environment and what our strategies are. So,
and just sort of thinking about the very practical elements of a site like this, in addition to the mechanical, are there other hazardous materials that are stored on site, gasoline, et cetera, and is there a methodology you're anticipating? I see that you've got a car wash and some mechanical for the car wash. Is there going to be a fueling station or anything?
That has not been a part of the discussion as of yet. I mean, we have used fueling stations on about half of the projects we've done with this client. It really becomes a matter of what the next proximity for fueling options are. At this particular location, there's not really a fueling station in very close proximity. I'm not sure if either of the other dealerships have.
There's a Shell station just on the other side of the 101 overpass.
I mean, it really becomes an operational decision about if they can negotiate. They consume quite a bit of fuel, as you might imagine. If we were to utilize fueling, it would probably be a subsurface tank. We'd go through all the normal
just thinking about what might be added
approaches
to this as you go forward, and other things to think about.
Right.
Yeah, I don't have much else to add at this point, unless you have other specific questions for us. I think that hopefully that's enough feedback for you at this point.
Yeah, that's
do
great.
we have any other comments from staff or anything that you'd like us to touch on that we haven't?
No, I think that was great. Give a little idea about what types of things you'd like to see come with the formal package. That's really, definitely one of the purposes of doing it this way.
Perfect.
And the focus on architecture, I think, is great. Thanks.
All right, great. Well, thank you very much. With that, we will close this item and move on in our agenda.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. So the next item on our agenda would be board staff announcements, updates, reports, and comments. I'll briefly explain what was not a very brief discussion at council Monday night. I think we started around 7:15, which was actually a little bit early. And we finished, I think I left the council chamber about 12:20, something like that. And at one point, we actually took a break because they needed to go print up copies of what the motion was becoming, because it had become so complicated. But what we're talking about here is the appeal of 429 University. And the issue the council revolved around had to do with whether the building was contextually compatible, and what the meaning of the word context was. And it was a very interesting discussion to sit and listen to the way the council moved through this and what they were challenged by, what caught their eye, what they were concerned about. I'll tell you, a piece of this has to do with the Kipling Road context and the fact that there are a number of historic structures on that public way. And they were clear about saying that although the project itself had been evaluated and had been deemed to not have historic significance, it's been altered pretty significantly, the context of the historic structures they felt should be considered as a part of the discussion for our board. And so what they've asked is that the project return to HRB, and I'll go to that hearing and provide information to them in support of and with staff, and ask them to provide some input about how they feel the structures on Kipling might influence the design of 429 on the corner. In addition to that, there was quite a bit of discussion about how the building itself related to the existing structures along University Avenue. I guess my own read of what I saw happening at council is they were looking at two-dimensional elevations of the building and weren't reading the relief that the applicant had developed for the building design. I don't think that they were as aware of the depth of setback of the variation in the building that occurs, and that you know, in my own evaluation of the building, I felt that we had arrived at a point where the two-story context of much of University Avenue along that area was pretty well drawn through and into the initial elements of the elevation, and then the building elevated to a three-story portion on the corner with other pieces that were stepped back. And one of the I don't have the final motion with me here, but one of the important things that became a component of the motion was that the building should relate to the immediate adjacent context, and that the upper floor should step back. And initially they said an upper floor, and so the council was very generous and allowed me to come back numerous times for clarification, because initially the motion was quite unclear and didn't provide much direction for us. And so I was really appreciative that they were open to providing very clear direction for us about what it is their concerns were and what they would like us to really look at. And this initial motion had the initial construct of the language had a statement in it that said an additional level that was stepped back. And I was quite concerned that that would start to set a precedent along University Avenue for only three-story buildings and not allow for the full 50 feet of height. You know, I think the thing that struck me over and over again was that directly across the street from this is a 50-foot high building that has no setback at all, is pretty severe in terms of its punched openings, doesn't have much of a pedestrian experience along University Avenue, and you know, that's part of the context. And so I wanted to make sure that we understood pretty clearly what it was that they were looking for. And I think you know,
context could be good or bad.
Context can be good or bad. So Mr. Hayes, I think, will interact with his client, and we'll see what the timing and result of this will be. But I fully expect that we will have a somewhat redesigned building returned to us for additional comment. But Amy, maybe you can tell me, are we intending to get interaction from HRB prior to Mr. Hayes' redesign so that he understands what the HRB would want to see as a component of this?
I think you've already provided a report at what happened at council, and I think we should leave it there, just because, you know, we didn't agendize this item, and so I don't want to, you know, speculate and do some things that might, yeah, take us in a direction we don't want to go. So thank you for reporting out on that.
Did I miss anything?
What's that?
Did I miss anything in that? Anything else you'd want to?
No, I would say that was an accurate characterization. Definitely the compatibility has reached a new level or plateau of where we are having a full discussion. And so I should say last night, Matt and I came to the council with the HRB and had a joint session. And so part of that, there was some discussion about, bringing projects to the HRB that had some historic something discussion. Yes, so policy has yet to be created on that, but that was some comments were made by the council to that effect. Yeah, that's, more to come on that. I want to definitely maybe agendize this, as soon as we have some more, just talking points or some kind of thing.
I think that'd be
about
great.
this. Yeah.
That'd be great. Thank you very much for that.
Okay, and then we have one other, I don't know if you had any other items. I would just, I just put on here Architectural Review Board Awards update. I don't have any, further development of my list because of the time crunch for myself. But I know that I've heard that this area out front, the lobby out front, is nearing completion. Supposedly it was going to be done this week to, take off the scaffolding or what have you and see, how many TVs are there. I don't know. What have we got? But I did get confirmation, in a preliminary way from the folks that are going to be calendaring what goes there. And they said, oh, this sounds like an ideal use of those, that bank of TVs. So I'm looking forward to, pressing on with that kind of October timeline where we might have the lobby and have our reception. As I mentioned earlier during the Mercedes item, I've pulled Matt in to help move this thing along with some strategy and help with getting the images. I know in the past we've had the ARB, we've kind of divvied it up and had assignments, so each ARB member could go out and take photos of the sites on the list. I think there's so many on the list that we, that's a big assignment, but we'll, perhaps I'll agendize it for our next meeting, and I'll have some time to finalize that list.
Let's do that. I have collected some additional input from a number of people that I've spoken to about how this might work. And so I think it would be great for us to have a little more discussion, and then we can create some assignments and try and help you move it forward. It's a big task.
And I think further, the last discussion we had on this was how might we reach out to the public, and so we're now that I have a partner to strategize, how maybe a member of the HRB could be pulled in as well, and to talk about maybe there's a project that had been reviewed by both the HRB and ARB or a few of them, and so that might be as part of this conversation.
Could be another category maybe.
Or something. Yeah. So Matt and I will be chatting it up and getting some more stuff to come back to the board for further discussion.
Well, I'm definitely excited about this, and I think that as a board we can help move this along. I think I heard that I know that applications were due yesterday for the additional open seat that we have, and so hopefully by the 4th we will have a new board member. And so we'll have one more body to help out with this process, which will be great.
You're referring to June 4th is the targeted date where we are anticipating.
A new board member available for us, a replacement board member. I didn't have any other, I do have one other thing. Is it appropriate for me to talk about a bit of discussion Jonathan and I have been having about how the findings are set up? Can I do that, or do we need to agendize that?
Yes, I would like to agendize it. I should mention, I was going to mention, I am now, that our very next meeting on the 21st, I've asked Jody, who is Gerhardt, who is doing one of the staff reports, to we're kind of giving some kind of options. I'm going to put that in the packet for this next meeting that show, groupings of the existing findings into categories.
Yeah.
And then going the next step further, that would have the findings, maybe 3 findings, and then 1 paragraph that addresses those 3 findings. Until we can change the code itself,
Right.
We're coming up with some ideas.
I think that's a very reasonable approach. The idea is that we are not changing the language.
Right.
We are not altering our approach. We are just taking the 16 findings and grouping them into logical categories and
Yes.
potentially creating responses that are relevant to those categories rather than to
Right.
each of the individual 16 items.
Right,
because
so it
it's
ends
just
up
such a-
being landscape, there's a landscape and natural features
It's often
category.
redundant.
Functionality, circulation, there's definitely categories that the existing findings do fit into.
We're not intending to skip over or
Right.
alter in any way the methodology. It's merely just the construct of the response
Correct.
in the staff report.
Right,
So-
because that was one of the things too that that Mayor Holman brought up and has brought up in the past is, the circular nature that we find ourselves in because we're repeating, key words from the generic finding in the answer to the finding, and it gets to be a circular kind of discussion. So we're trying to improve upon that.
Anyone have any comments about that or thoughts about that? Great. All right, so I think that's all we have for today. So I think we can adjourn this meeting, and we have 1 item for subcommittee, which is 2080 Channing Avenue, and we'll meet with the applicant for that after we're adjourned. Thank you.